Operation Epic Fury commenced with surgical precision. The United States deployed B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to meticulously dismantle critical nodes deep within Iran. Then, the Pentagon escalated, sending in the B-52 stratofortresses to devastate Iranian infrastructure with literal sledgehammer strikes. Next up in the rotation are the bones. The B-1 Lancers, US B-1 pilots, have just executed an unbelievable kinetic strike on Iran that will undoubtedly be analyzed in every military aviation academy from this day forward. This is the final crushing blow, and it has struck with such overwhelming force that Iran's collapsing regime will never structurally recover. The United States has officially signaled, forget stealth, we are in total destruction mode. Before we break down exactly how the B-1s pulled this off, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Titan Mechanics and ring the bell so you never miss a critical tactical briefing. Now, let's look at the intel. According to detailed reporting by Air and Space Forces magazine, the arrival of B-1 bombers in the Iranian theater signifies that Washington has absolutely no intention of concluding its campaign of devastating airstrikes against the country and its despotic regime. That aggressive posture was confirmed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. Speaking to reporters at the Pentagon on March 2nd, Kane stated unequivocally, "This work is just beginning and will continue." And continue it certainly has. The US unleashed its supersonic B-1 bombers on Iran almost immediately after it sent the stealthy B-2s to strike at the absolute heart of the country's command and control facilities. These B-1 bomber crews had to endure grueling transcontinental flights. Similar to the B-2 pilots who preceded them, the B-1 crews had to fly for over 30 continuous hours to reach their release points over Iran. This extreme endurance was necessitated because the United Kingdom initially refused to allow the US to utilize the critical forward operating bases of RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia. Access to Diego Garcia, situated strategically in the Indian Ocean, would have granted America's B-1 pilots a vital opportunity to land, refuel, arm up, and physically prepare for their kinetic strikes. That geopolitical situation has since dramatically shifted, and we will analyze those ramifications later in this briefing. But for the initial wave of devastating strikes, the B-1 pilots proved that they didn't need any allied assistance to execute the mission. Over 30 hours in the cockpit was standard operating procedure for America's aviators as they followed up the surgical work done by their compatriots in the B-2s with a massive bombing run that has left Iran's military infrastructure devastated. So the obvious tactical question arises: what exact mission profile did the B-1 bombers execute in Iran? They participated in a massive coordinated campaign that saw the US strike over 1,250 individual targets during the first 48 hours of the conflict alone, according to Air and Space Forces magazine, and their specific role was brutally simple: deliver a staggering 74,000-pound payload directly into the heart of the Iranian military machine. According to the magazine, the US sent a 3-ship formation of B-1s into the Iranian theater. These bombers took part in a dedicated mission to obliterate Iran's ballistic missile sites, along with striking even more of the Critical Command and Control, or C2. Centers that the IRGC desperately needs to keep operational if it hopes to coordinate anything remotely resembling a cohesive defense against the US military. Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure was the absolute priority for these B-1 strikes, and we will explain the strategic reasoning behind that in just a few minutes. But first, we must contextualize that 74,000-pound payload capacity. Multiply that massive figure by 3 for the number of B-1s that the Pentagon deployed, and you get an insane maximum theoretical yield of 222,000 pounds of explosive fury delivered to Iran in a single, coordinated sortie. And Fury is exactly the right terminology. It fits both the overarching US operation, officially designated Operation Epic Fury, and the sheer volume of ordnance the B-1 bomber can pack into its internal rotary launchers. We do not have declassified confirmation regarding the exact munitions the US B-1s utilized in Iran, but the weapon systems officers aboard these bombers would have been entirely spoilt for choice, as almost every weapon the Lancer can deliver possesses the kinetic energy to utterly vaporize a target. On the unguided conventional bomb front, a single B-1 can be loaded with up to 84 Mark 82 dumb bombs, each weighing 500 pounds. Alternatively, the aircraft can carry 24 massive Mark Mark 84 general-purpose bombs, each weighing a devastating 2,000 pounds, MK-62s, which weigh 500 pounds each, and MK-65 quick-strike naval mines can also be loaded into the bomber's bays, though it seems highly improbable that naval mines would have been utilized during these specific overland B-1 sorties in Iran. As for the unguided bombs, all three variations are tactical possibilities, though deploying them would require the B-1s to fly almost directly over their intended targets. This specific flight profile would potentially place the massive bombers directly within the engagement envelope of whatever remained of Iran's air defenses, even though those defense networks were systematically shattered by the earlier B-2 stealth raids and the subsequent sledgehammer strikes delivered by America's B-52s. The lingering possibility of a B-1 being targeted by a surviving Iranian SAM site was likely enough to deter American commanders from ordering direct overflights, but the US Air Force didn't need to fly directly over the targets. The overwhelming odds are that the Pentagon utilized its B-1s to deliver massive firepower from a safe standoff distance to systematically destroy Iran's missile facilities and C-2 centers. As the US Air Force officially details, the B-1 can be fully loaded with 24 2,000-pound GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs. Alternatively, it can carry up to 15 500-pound GBU-38 JDAMs, or crucially up to 24 AGM-158A Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missiles. And it is the specific use of the word standoff in that last missile's designation that provides the critical clue as to how the US deployed its B-1s. Rather than sending its trio of heavy bombers directly into the airspace above the targets, the US vectored them toward Iran so they could ripple fire their massive payloads of cruise missiles from a completely safe distance. Thousands upon thousands of pounds of precision-guided munitions battered Iran's C-2 centers and hardened missile facilities, leaving them as little more than smoking. Radioactive craters in the earth, completely obliterated by an enemy platform they couldn't even track on radar. The National Security Journal provides several more classified details regarding the operational profile itself. It reports that the trio of B-1 bombers flew grueling, continuous round-trip sorties directly from the continental United States. They were heavily supported by an armada of American aerial refueling tankers stationed over the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, allowing the bombers to remain airborne without ever touching down at forward bases to refuel. The B-1s then pushed into the theater like flying assassins and executed their tasking perfectly. They penetrated the edges of Iran's airspace, unleashed their payload of precision bombs and standoff missiles, banked hard, and flew straight back home, likely utilizing the exact same chain of aerial refueling tankers to safely return to the US mainland. These specific B-1 sorties were only made tactically possible by the preceding B-2 stealth bombing runs. The journal makes this strategic reality clear when analyzing the critical operational differences between the stealthy B-2 Spirit and the supersonic B-1 Lancer. If the B-2 can approach closer to heavily defended or hardened targets, the B-1B must either operate after air defenses have been degraded or remain outside the most densely defended areas altogether, the military outlet reports. This is precisely why standoff munitions are the most logical and likely choice for the B-1's mission profile. The aerial battlefield had to be shaped first, and the US took full devastating advantage of that shaped environment with its B-1 bombers. The Lancers functioned exactly as what the National Security Journal defines as a high-capacity launch platform. After the B-2s had completed their mission with deep, penetrating strikes against radar nodes, the B-1s immediately followed up with massive precision strikes launched from a standoff distance. This sequenced attack was only possible because Iran's integrated air defenses were so thoroughly ruined that low observable stealth was no longer a strict tactical requirement. The US Air Force still has to exercise operational caution, of course, which is exactly why it is not utilizing its heavy bombers in traditional gravity bombing runs right over the targets. But the entire battle space has been shaped by the Pentagon using an incredibly ingenious strategy. It allowed commanders to utilize a layered bomber approach to systematically dismantle and overcome Iran's layered air defenses. The Iranian defensive onion has been completely peeled. All that is left are the tears of a crumbled regime. Drop a like on this video right now if you are finding this tactical breakdown valuable, and share it with your squad. Now back to the target analysis. Let's re-examine the specific targets that the US chose to obliterate with its B-1 bombers. Iran International confirms that the overnight strikes conducted by the heavy U.S. bombers on March 2nd successfully took out above-ground ballistic missile launch sites, along with the critical C2 centers that we analyzed earlier. Stick with us, as we will explain exactly why the destruction of these specific nodes dictates the entire future of this war in just a moment. TBN Israel provides additional on-the-ground context, noting that in the immediate aftermath of the B-1 strikes, catastrophic damage was inflicted at some of Iran's most highly guarded facilities. Strong explosion sounds were heard in the area of the nuclear facility and the Air Force base in central Isfahan in Iran, the intelligence outlet reports. He said the same outlet firmly corroborates the reports that the U.S. has been specifically targeting Iran's ballistic missile sites and C2 centers with its B-1 bombers, all of which feeds directly into the overarching American strategy. What the United States, operating in tandem with Israel, has unleashed on Iran is already apocalyptic from the perspective of the Ayatollah's regime. However, the tactical reality is that things are about to get exponentially worse for Iran. There are several critical reasons why this specific targeting strategy matters immensely in terms of what happens next. Starting with the destroyed C2 centers, losing these nodes is a catastrophic, paralyzing blow for the IRGC. A command and control center is any centralized, hardened location where senior commanders gather to process intelligence and direct military operations. It is from these highly secure centers that tactical orders are relayed to infantry units on the ground, as well as to naval fleets, fighter squadrons, and strategic missile forces. Think of C2 as the central nervous system of an entire wartime operation. Without C2, the brain is completely severed from the rest of the body. If your brain was suddenly disconnected from your spine right now, your body wouldn't be able to react to anything. You would be clinically dead. That is exactly what the US Air Force has done to the Iranian military with its relentless focus on obliterating C2 centers. Counterattacks aren't even being formulated, let alone executed, because Iran has effectively lost its brain. This decapitation strike also severely impacts Iran's ability to monitor the battle space. For instance, it is functionally impossible to launch coordinated drone swarms and anti-ship missile strikes against US carrier strike groups when the radar and intelligence infrastructure required to actually locate those naval assets has been vaporized. What we are witnessing here, and the B-1s have played an absolutely crucial role in this phase, is the total systematic dismantlement of everything that sits behind the scenes of Iran's military posture. And it was achieved by the US in a matter of mere days, and we are already seeing the hard statistical results. Beyond the paralyzing loss of its C2 centers, Iran is also struggling to cope with the reality that America's B-1 bombers have physically destroyed a massive percentage of its ballistic missile launch sites. Combine those two factors, no brain to give the order, and no launchers to fire the weapon, and you get a catastrophic drop in missile launches by the IRGC. According to a detailed March 4th BBC report, Iran has managed to launch approximately 571 ballistic missiles and 1,391 suicide drones since the beginning of the conflict. That rapid expenditure presents a massive logistical problem in its own right regarding their remaining stockpiles, which we will analyze shortly. However, General Kane confirmed on March 4th that Iran's daily ballistic missile launches were already down a staggering 86% when compared to the opening day of the conflict, and that launch rates had plummeted an additional 23% between March 3rd and March 4th alone. Add a massive 73% decline in drone launches into that statistical mix, and you clearly see the devastating effects of the B-1 targeting strategy. Take out the C2 nodes, and complex missile launches simply cannot be coordinated. Physically destroy the missile bases and the mobile launchers, and missile strikes physically cannot happen, even if the IRGC miraculously manages to get a backup C2 network online. The Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA, throws another massive analytical wrench into the works for Iran. On March 5th, the think tank compared the degradation we are seeing from Iran right now to the burn rate it experienced during the 12-day war with Israel back in 2025. With US and Israeli forces rapidly destroying roughly 75% of Iran's launch capacity, the regime can no longer conduct sustained large-volume barrages. Iran can still mount limited missile attacks, but each attack burns through its remaining launcher force and forces even smaller follow-on attacks. Jinsa concludes, the Institute backs this bold claim up with hard intelligence figures suggesting that Iran has already lost up to 73% of its medium-range ballistic missiles, and up to 52% of its short-range ballistic missiles, and the 75% of its mobile launchers that we already analyzed. Iran has been hit with a devastating operational 1-2 combo. The sheer scale of the coordinated US and Israeli air campaign is such that Iran has burned through massive amounts of its strategic missile reserves for absolutely no tangible tactical results. And as more and more launchers get turned into radioactive dust, first by the B-1s and then by the fighter bombers coming after them, Iran will be physically restricted to very limited, isolated launches even if it somehow manages to rebuild its stockpiles. This is a brilliant, methodical strategy by the Pentagon, and it is not the only catastrophic problem that Iran has to deal with as the war transitions beyond its initial shaping phase. More B-1 Lancers are going to be entering the theater, as you are about to find out. And when they arrive, they, along with America's other heavy bombers and strike fighters, will be able to operate with even more absolute impunity over Iranian airspace than we have already witnessed. The National Security Journal stated that the US had achieved air superiority over Iran, but according to analysis from The Hill, that superiority has already transformed into absolute air supremacy. The outlet quotes General David Petraeus, the former director of the CIA, who also previously served as the commander of US Central Command. Well, what it looks like is that we now have the ability to fly not just stealth fighter bombers, F-35 and B-2 stealth bombers, but also the real workhorses that can carry enormous payloads, either the B-52s and the B-1s, Petraeus told the outlet. He then added a chilling assessment for the Iranians. We're not concerned really at this point in time about the air and ballistic defense of Iran, as long as you stay above heavy machine gun range, and that means you can just really pour it on. Above heavy machine gun range. If that is the operational reality, then it means whatever sophisticated missile-based air defenses Iran previously possessed have been rendered completely obsolete. Air supremacy has been achieved for practically any aircraft that can fly above a few thousand feet, which easily covers every single heavy bomber and strike fighter that the US Air Force might want to bring to bear against the regime. The kinetic missile math is heavily in America's favor. Iran has been degraded to the point where it can only carry out isolated, uncoordinated strikes, and it possesses absolutely no capability to defend itself against the overwhelming retaliation that those strikes immediately prompt. US B-1 bombers played a massive, disproportionate role in creating this exact tactical situation. And, as we mentioned earlier, we likely haven't seen the last of these supersonic bombers in the Iranian theater. You may recall that we detailed how America's first trio of B-1 bombers had to fly massive, exhausting round trips from the US mainland without landing because the UK initially refused to grant the Pentagon access to key forward military bases. That logistical hurdle has changed dramatically. On March 1st, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer reversed course and decided that the UK will, in fact, provide full access. The abrupt policy decision seems to have occurred in the immediate wake of Iran striking a UK military installation in Cyprus with a suicide drone, an act that has essentially dragged the UK on into a direct supporting role for the conflict. The US administration hasn't exactly been magnanimous about this sudden turnaround, likely feeling that the UK severely complicated the opening phase of the war by denying base access when it was needed most. From the Pentagon's perspective, this lack of forward basing created significantly more operational risk for its B-1 bomber crews. US President Donald Trump has already delivered some scathing public criticism aimed at Starmer, claiming that the Prime Minister is now looking to join wars after we've already won. There are also circulating intelligence suggestions that the UK may deploy elements of its aircraft carrier strike group into the Persian Gulf region, which led to another sharp public rebuke from Trump. The US president took to Truth Social to state, "The United Kingdom, our once great ally, maybe the greatest of them all, is finally giving serious thought to sending 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East. That's okay, Prime Minister Starmer, we don't need them any longer. But we will remember." However, what appears to be a deepening political divide forming between Washington and London may instead be highly performative. How do we know this? On March 7th, The Guardian confirmed that 4 US B-1 bombers had officially landed at RAF Fairford, which you will remember as one of the 2 critical bases that the UK initially barred the US from utilizing during those first B-1 strikes. These heavy bombers are likely stopping off for rapid refueling and crew rest before they make their way to the strategic hub of Diego Garcia, from which they will launch yet more devastating strikes into Iran. And once those specific strikes are concluded, the B-1s will be able to easily return to the UK bases, refuel, restock their bomb bays, and immediately go again. So, what the world witnessed on March 2nd was merely a taster of American air power, and what is coming next is going to be infinitely worse for the Iranian regime, as the US, now backed by UK logistical support, is in a position where it can send its B-1s into Iranian airspace over and over again in very rapid succession. Bear in mind that this is an Iran that is already being relentlessly peppered with kinetic attacks. By March 6th, Breaking Defense was reporting that the US officially claimed to have struck over 3,000 distinct targets, including completely neutralizing 43 of Iran's naval warships. Piece by piece, node by node, the US is systematically stripping away every single asset that might have made Iran a credible military threat. The forward deployment of B-1 bombers at UK air bases only amplifies the massive, consistent firepower that the Pentagon intends to bring down on Iran. What remains of Iran's fractured regime will be desperately searching for a diplomatic off-ramp, but it appears Washington is absolutely not going to provide one. According to CNN, Trump has already stated definitively that no ceasefire deal will be negotiated with Iran until the country's regime offers an unconditional surrender to the United States. That surrender hasn't materialized yet, though Trump has publicly suggested that Iran has effectively surrendered to its Middle Eastern neighbors. The tactical reality on the ground doesn't reflect that. Now, Trump is openly declaring that the US military is preparing to hit very hard against Iran with a new wave of strikes that will specifically include areas and groups of people that haven't been targeted in previous waves. It is highly probable that the forward deployment of B-1s to RAF Fairford is perfectly synchronized with these new threats. The Pentagon wants its heavy bomber fleet fueled, armed, and ready to launch the second the execution order is given, and Iran is in for a world of catastrophic pain far beyond what it has already endured when the B-1s are unleashed for round 2. With no diplomatic off-ramps being offered that could preserve the Ayatollah's power, Iran is desperately attempting to widen the scope of the war, and in doing so, it is making a catastrophic strategic miscalculation. We analyzed earlier that Iran has fired off approximately 500 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 suicide drones. The critical detail is that the vast majority of these munitions have actually targeted its Middle Eastern neighbors, rather than the US carrier strike groups surrounding the country. Every single one of these desperate strikes is a stark reminder that Iran still wants to project the image of being the regional bully, even as its actual military capability is being systematically dismantled from underneath it. As Al Jazeera noted in a March 7th strategic analysis, all that Tehran is really accomplishing with these uncoordinated attacks is destroying whatever microscopic amounts of geopolitical goodwill it has left with its neighbors, the very same neighbors it would need to rely heavily upon to mediate an eventual end to hostilities. Should Washington ever actually make that diplomatic option available. The Gulf states did not and do not want to be dragged into a direct kinetic conflict. But when Iran is indiscriminately firing ballistic missiles and drones into their sovereign territory, it is Iran that will bear the absolute brunt of their unified response, regardless of how the war initially started. And all the while, America's B-1 Lancers are lurking just over the horizon. Now operating from secure UK bases, those B-1 crews are prepping a new massive round of precision strikes that could be exponentially more destructive than the last. And Iran's shattered military won't be able to do a single thing to stop them. The final decapitating blow may be imminent, and it will forge a very different US-dominated Gulf region in the immediate future. Right now, this is looking like a flashpoint conflict that could potentially trigger World War III, though that worst-case scenario is heavily dependent on whether or not Tehran can find any major global allies actually willing to bleed by its side, beyond the weakened proxy militias it already controls. There are other massive geopolitical conflicts currently simmering that could serve as the absolute flashpoints for World War III, and we analyze 5 of the most dangerous ones in our dedicated breakdown video. Check that video out right now to learn more, and remember to subscribe to Titan Mechanics for more expert examinations of the exact weapons and strategies the US is utilizing to cripple Iran.